Hello everyone and welcome to the very first episode of the Sesh with hashtag He Before Me. My name is Rasaad Adams. It's an absolute privilege for me to be here today. I'm sitting with the founder of hashtag He Before Me, Mr. Atang Swartbooi. How are you today?
I'm very good, and it feels very good to be on the other side of the conversation for once and not having to interview people. Yeah, it's a huge honor for me to be here and finally to tell my side of the story, as they say.
It's an absolute privilege for me as well. I must say it's an honor, really, you having the faith in me to interview you. And I'm very excited to hear Mr. Swartboi's story and just to hear what drives him and what makes him so passionate about the fight against gender-based violence. So I want to start with hashtag Me Before Me. Where did it all start? What drove you to start this organization, to start this campaign? And if you can touch on the name as well, why hashtag Me Before Me?
Okay, so basically what happened to me was a thing that happens to most of us, which was for me kind of the problem. So roughly around when I was 10 years old, it started, we moved in with our stepfather, who gave us basically the world, because I don't think if it wasn't for him, I'd even be here right now. So yeah, he's basically been my father my whole life, and I regard him as my father. I love him for that. And there was just a point in my family's marriage and all of that where things started to take a very sharp turn for the worst. It wasn't as usual. It wasn't the usual, I love you and I love you too. It was just, it started to get very abusive and all of that. And it started to reflect on their relationship with us as well. And so, yeah, the brunt of it started to get to us, the children. We are four at home. Initially we were three, but then now we are four, like 3 years ago. So yeah, at that time it was really hard to put things into context. Yeah, so when I was roughly 10, it started to get very abusive. At first it was like just the normal verbal abuse, and then it started to translate and transform to something much more physical. So when I was 16, 17, it started to get very worse. I was in high school, and obviously with teenage hormones and all of that, it was very hectic for him to have been through that, and his way of expressing his dominance over the household was physical. So yeah, it was a very tough time for us at home. And then the turning point was the day after my birthday. It was
17th.
my 18th birthday. Yes, I was a matriculant at the time. I was busy with mid-year exams. This was, yeah, so that was the time where things started to take a very sharp turn for the worst. And I remember that night, so it was the 6th of June, my birthday, and then around about 1 o'clock in the morning, I started to hear voices. But then throughout my whole life, I've become accustomed to these voices, these shoutings in the room and all of that, and it was just very hard for all of us. And I know, for example, that my brothers were the ones that used to run to the room to make sure that my mom is okay, to make sure that no one fights or beats someone to near death or something, because it has happened before. My mom has sustained substantial injuries before as a result of this. And yeah, so when I was then at that moment, I finally started to come out of my room and go see what was going on. I think this was one of the very little times that I actually went to my father and my parents and asked what was going on. He was obviously very angry at the time, and I remember him shouting out like insults, and I said something to him that triggered him the most. I think I said, "I'm not your child, so you will not beat me like you usually do. You will not beat my mom like you want to all the time." And it didn't sit well with him. And yeah, at that time, I literally walked into the room with him kicking my mom.
And what was your other siblings at that time?
They were in the room. I came late actually. I came later. They were screaming and crying, and I know that the third born is especially very, very emotional about all of this. He's the one that really engages a lot in their fighting and all of that. And I came into the room, and seeing my mom in that situation, it didn't sit well with me. Then then obviously, like any man would in that state, or any boy would as I were, I tried to get in between the fighting. That didn't turn out too well. I fought my father, which is something that I don't encourage, but at the time it was a necessity for me. I fought my father, and he absolutely made sure that I understood who was the one that was more powerful. All I know is I ran out of the room as he was just beating me, and I just wanted to run away basically, because I knew there was no way I'm going to overpower him. I thought I was tough, I thought I was growing up at the time, but clearly not. Then I ran out of the room. At the time, the gate was locked. He locked the gates just before he came to me and did all of that. The gate was locked. Luckily, he didn't have enough time to lock the kitchen gate, which was where I found my exit out of the house. I went out of the kitchen house, ran, jumped over the gate, and I've said this before, but no one knew why I said this before. I made jokes about people jumping over the gates, but I think it's just more a traumatic experience for me. I jumped out of the gate and I just started running. I didn't think about my mom, what I was leaving her with, what I was leaving my siblings with. I was worried while running, but literally all I could think about was the beatings I got the same night, which to this day I think I was a coward to not stay there for my mom, but I really think I would not be in this mental state if I did not do what I did. And I remember running to the petrol station. I didn't have a phone. I left my phone in the house, and I called a friend called who was at that time the head boy of our school. And basically, he told me to go find shelter where I could. I had no friends. I'm someone, people know me, I'm someone who just stays in the house. Either I'm working outside or I'm inside, working inside. So I never knew anyone. And the closest people I knew was my uncle's place, which was roughly 4 kilometers from where I was. So it was that, going to that place or staying at the garage, knowing that he might find me there. Then, luckily, my mom, I heard, called someone in the church who came to their rescue and came to them and made sure that they're okay, everything is all right and all of that. And I saw our Fortuner driving down the road while I was walking. I don't know where I was walking to. I was just walking in the dark. This was 2 o'clock in the morning. I mean, it was cold. It is June. It's cold. I have my shorts on. I only have like the vest that I had while sleeping. So it was very cold. I didn't even feel the cold at that time. Just walking for safety. Don't know. You're walking for safety, but then you're walking in the middle of danger. So it is those experiences that really drove me to where I am now. And then the following year in 2020, I think everyone knew the stats, which said in a 3-month period that from March up until about May, June, there was a scary study that came out that 40,000 women reported their cases of gender-based violence. And one of my friends at that time told me that she's very scared of going to town alone in a taxi because of something that happened to her. And that was when I decided, you know what, I need to release a video. And I released a video on the 12th of June, I think, 2020, and saying something in 3 languages, trying to reach as many people as I can, trying to relate to as many people as I can. And yeah, when I finished that video, everyone was just supporting me and said that I should never stop advocating for something that is so right. And 2 days after that, I started the WhatsApp group.
And I would like to get to that. You know, the later stage in your life when you started doing the more physical field work. Yeah, young boy growing up in the small town of Brits.
Yes,
Brits.
that's good.
You know, experiencing abuse from a very young age, starting at the age of 10, starts with verbal abuse, moves on to physical abuse, and then having to protect his family, his siblings, against an abusive stepfather. We're going to take a commercial break now, but when we come back, we'll continue our discussion with the founder of #YouBeforeMe, Atang Swartbooi. Stay with us.
Arthur Ashe says, start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. And the greatest way to start is by having a team of the elite make you an elite. Whether you're an influencer, YouTuber, or an aspiring entrepreneur, the Street Grad Worldwide gives you global level service, lowest prices, and the greatest of value. If this is you, catch us on IG, ask us where the grad at, and we will change your life.
A safe environment that is welcoming to everyone.
We have the widest array of facilities on offer. We have a restaurant, we have a fully equipped gym, we have an indoor training pool, a heated training pool, we have an outdoor pool, squash court, a lounge, a little area where students can come together, have a bit of a kuier, have a bit of a jaw, without leaving the safety of the estate.
A restaurant part where they can have a sit down and choose anything from a variety of meals and just have a good time.
We know that without our students, without our tenants, we are nothing.
Welcome back to the Sesh with #YouBeforeMe. We are in conversation with the founder of YouBeforeMe, Mr. Atang Swartbooi. Now, earlier he spoke to us about his story, where he grew up, and what initially drove him to start #YouBeforeMe. Now, Atang, you spoke about your university life and how you, in your first year, began all of this through a video, and then friends, colleagues, etc., encouraging you to continue doing what you do. Well, how has that journey been so far?
It has been mentally exhausting, but it has been a true honor to have gone through this path. For the past year, I have learned a lot, and I mean created opportunities where there were none, banged down doors where there are absolutely none. So after that video, obviously after receiving that much attention from people saying, this is such a good video, putting things into context in only 16 seconds, but in 3 languages, was touching for them. And it was my very first video on my Instagram as well. And after that, I started the WhatsApp group. I told my one friend called Tulufelo Pete, and I told him, and I told him, you know what, let's start something where we are going to educate people and talk about gender based violence. That's where it started. Then I started the WhatsApp group called #YouBeforeMe, and I'll get to the name, how I got to the name. I started that group, and we have grown significantly. We were 3 people, and now we are at 50 people who continuously engage. It's not like we have 50 people where 3 people engage. It's on a certain day we can have 20 people engage all at once, and we are all just reflecting and doing self-introspection, because that was the first issue that we identified. Doing self-introspection, going into yourself and asking yourself questions that you would not necessarily be able to ask, like, is what I'm doing right? Am I advocating for something that might benefit the future, our children and all of those people who might come later on? And basically that's how the whole WhatsApp thing started, and we have grown from there. We have started to create content. Initially I have a deputy. I don't know whether he still regards himself as a deputy, but this guy was called Reinhard van Sail. And he's an absolutely amazing person. He helped me set up videos. He advised me on the way forward. He put up a manifesto where we are going to entrench our values into what we want to do as an initiative. And we started doing that. And then we decided on releasing videos, short, descriptive videos about what we talk about in the WhatsApp group. And it was really interesting to see how guys would really just stick their hands up and say, I want to be part of the video. And knowing that they were going to be placed on such a huge social media platform, which was the most encouraging thing for me, that kept me going. that first video that we did with, I think, 19 or 18 made in one video, that for me was the pinnacle of the whole initiative as it stands. Then we started delving forward and asking ourselves, is what we're doing enough? Can we do more? And then I approached someone and said, can I please have a talk show event here at the hostel, my residence where I live in? They said no, because no one would listen to me. At the time, the leader of our hostel, no one would listen to me because I was a first year at the time last year. And I couldn't believe what he said to me. It was very important content, except it came from a very young mouth, which is something that I understood from where he was looking at it. And then I went to a friend called Swartbooi, who advised me and said, why don't you just have this online? What you want to say, just say it online. And it was a revelation for me. I have never looked back ever since, and I started to host speaker events. My first speaker event was at the time Mr. Nico Prenslow, who was Mr. Campus of the NWU. And I did a show with him, a very amateur show with him. I think you would know. Very amateur show with him, and we basically talked about very important issues. But for me, it wasn't the amateurish show that we had, but rather the content that we're trying to advocate and put out there. That was the most important thing. And then after that, after receiving a phone call from the then Miss SA Campus, who is Miss South African Campus, Miss Kotatso Sifik, who said, I would like to do a show with you in December for 60 Days of Activism. And we decided to do it at the end of 60 Days of Activism. And from then on, I decided this thing is sustainable and I'm going to do it no matter what. And I did a show, and from then on, just never stopped looking back.
For the sake of getting back at that specific leader in your residence that you refer to now,
Yes.
who told you that, listen, you are first year, they won't listen to you. For the sake of getting back to him, do you think that you have grown physically, mentally, emotionally from where you were then to where you are now?
I think that the most interesting part about it is you can never be ready for a no. That was the very first hectic no that I received.
I mean, it's a great opportunity.
Yes.
Speaking to a group of more than 300 men.
Yeah. At the time, it was a very difficult time. I understood that, but I have grown significantly from last year in, I think, November or September it was then, to now, which is exactly a year onwards. The growth has been significant in that mentally, you're starting to accept that if someone tells you no, you just move on to the next one. You don't have time to delve on the no's as much. It will be disappointing, and you ask yourself the question, why are so many people telling me no so many times? And mentally, it does put some taxing on you. It does tax you a bit. You will want to give up, but I have never ever let my passion be driven away from me just because of a simple no. And I thank him for the no. It was, if he didn't say no, maybe I would never have done the online speaker events that I did. So every single no I saw as an opportunity. So compared to now and then, no then was I should probably give up, and now no is this is not the right time for it. Look for another opportunity.
Atang, obviously we see it in the news, we see it on social media, our leaders talk about it. I mean, I think President Cyril Ramaphosa in a couple of his speeches referred to it as another pandemic that we're facing in our country, the issue of gender-based violence, and of course you have experienced it firsthand. How bad is it in South Africa? How bad is the situation?
I think the worst thing for me is if someone says 1 in 5 women get raped every day, or every hour, or every minute. I think the worst thing for me is, why do we have to have one person getting raped? That's how bad it is. If we are the rape capital of the world, as we are identified to be, then we must truly question ourselves, why is there even one person getting raped? I mean, it doesn't take a lot for a person to realize that what the woman says you must accept. What a woman tells you, you must accept. It doesn't matter who you are, what your affiliation is with that woman, what she says counts, and what she says must be the way. And for you to ask me that how bad is it, it's kind of putting it mildly. If I were to start describing it, I would not even start to describe the effects of this issue in South Africa especially.
A couple of solutions that you can think of from a government perspective, from civil society. What can be done to alleviate this social illness, if one can call it that?
Well, first of all, we need to get rid of the fact that this is a government issue. And I know I might be triggering a lot of people right now, but let's think about this logically. You are sitting at home and your father hits your mother. At that point, the government is nowhere to be found. The only person who truly saw the event were my little brothers and I. So, logically, you would think that education at home is at the pinnacle and must be the most important part of eradicating gender-based violence. You as a parent, you as a future parent, must take it upon yourself to teach your children, one, respect, and two, dignity. And everyone has a right to both of those concepts. And if we can accept those two things, we can truly move on and be a stalwart in the fight against gender-based violence, let alone what the government can do. They can put in as much money as possible. They can put in 1 billion rands towards an incentive that they have. But the fact of the matter is, we are the people. We are the people who must try and effect the change amongst ourselves. Before you start looking at the government and what they are doing, think about one thing. Have you ever had a friend that you know who has hit or who has abused or economically abused his girlfriend, and you've done absolutely nothing about it? So before you start pointing fingers at people you can't even see, or you don't have control over, or you can't even come in contact with, start to do some self-introspection. I mean, that was the first thing that I told the people that I work with. We need to set the example. We need the state to, we need the government to realize that we are willing to change if you are willing to support us. That's the thing. The government is supposed to support us and not be the only resource that is there to solve the issue of gender-based violence.
But it's not easy, Atang, saying that we need to raise our children with that mentality, because you would get a household, literally in your situation, and I can applaud you for standing up against what happened in your household, but not all children are that privileged to have parents, or at least one parent that can tell them, listen, this is how you treat a lady, this is how you treat your fellow human being. We're not all that privileged to be able to, get raised in situations like that.
I think then, for example, me who was raised in that kind of atmosphere and sense of being, I have took it upon myself to teach other people differently. It is your choice. Ultimately, whether you decide to try and advocate for gender-based violence or not is your choice. No one can force you, no one can force you to change your mindset. Your mindset is exactly what it is, your mindset. You have the choice to change it. No one else can change it for you. That's what we are advocating for. Yes, you can grow up in a very difficult household. However, it is very important to realize that you are not your circumstances. It is a cliche, but it's so important to realize. And it is that can only deem as an excuse for someone to retaliate from actually contributing towards the fight against gender-based violence. It is a fight because people out there are fighting our women and children for absolutely sometimes no reason, or they say she provoked me, which is unsubstantiating for me to put it mildly.
Atang also recently started writing for Netwerk 24 die Student, and when we come back, we're going to talk about these platforms and how we as youngsters can use it to really voice our opinions on these pressing issues in our society. We'll be back.
What makes Green Meadows so amazing is that not only do the staff have a relationship with our tenants, but the staff have a relationship with each other. We have the most amazing relationships in our works environment amongst all of us. So we are all friends. We are really here for each other.
We offer customer service that supports our tenants and make them feel homely.
We are able to, because we are such amazing work environments, we are able to offer that to our tenants. So we are able to create spaces where our tenants can come to speak to us about stuff. We are able to create spaces where our tenants can really live out their student life with us.
Welcome back to the Sesh with hashtag You Before Me. We're in our last segment in conversation with Atang Swartbooi, the founder of hashtag You Before Me. Now Atang, you recently started writing for Netwerk 24 Die Student. Your first piece did actually quite well, and there was actually one of the victims or one of the friends, relatives of the victims that commented on one of the stories. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so initially is actually one of my success stories, or what I would deem as inspirational to some people. I wrote to the student, Netwerk 24, which is a subordinate to News 24, and I wrote to them in August, back when I started hashtag You Before Me, and to be honest, it wasn't so good, which I understood, but they rejected my piece back in August, and after inquiring a lot, they said we won't be using it. It's not good enough. Then obviously I had to reflect. Then again in February, I said, you know what, I'm gonna write another one. And at that time I was very emotional because something similar happened again, and I was writing it from a very emotional sense. And yeah, I continued to write, and I sent it to them, and they said, yeah, this is actually very good. And they published it for the first time. And someone commented on it in their comment section. Two people commented. One was a very, very ignorant person. So sometimes I use like expressions, some metaphors to try and emphasize something. And I contrasted COVID-19 and gender based violence with each other, and how the government has failed to really execute their power to eradicate this issue. And yeah, I put something like they are using AK-47s to fight COVID-19 because the military was at that time deployed, but for gender-based violence they do not do that. And the person just said, first of all, how can you trust that all the information is true and relevant if you don't even know that the military does not use AK-47s? Which is the exact kind of people that I wanted to
Seriously, out of everything that you mentioned and touch on in that specific piece, which is very well written, by the way, that's what that individual picks up on.
That's what that individual... No, that's okay. That's what that individual picked up on. And for me, that is the kind of people that we need to talk to. Those are the kind of people that we need to irritate and be a menace to when it comes to let them know that this issue exists. They are very ignorant, Rasaad, and I can tell you about many of my friends who are in the exact same mindset, but it would be absolutely elongated talk if we delve on that. But then I wrote a second one, which for me was the best piece I have ever written by far. And it just boiled down to we must all contribute towards the fight against gender-based violence. Doesn't matter if you're a church, and I exposed churches. Basically it was just an expose on what people are doing wrong and what institutions are doing wrong and everything else. And you can go read up on that and criticize me if you want to. But yeah, and this one victim commented, and she said that at a university, her friend had to sign a non-disclosure agreement to not let her experience of gender-based violence be publicized. Which was for me very sad, because how can a university even suggest that? Obviously I don't know who that person is, so we can't physically go to the university and inquire about those. But for the institutions that are doing that out there, it is absolutely incredible to think that you are the place where all these young people can learn about all these issues, and you can read so many of them at a time. So that was for me the thing that I wanted to achieve with my pieces. Get to a different audience, which was an Afrikaans audience, because most of the people that follow me are not Afrikaans on my Instagram. So I realized that as a person, you must do your own research about the people that look at your stuff. And I had to reach another audience. I had to find another way. And I did. And to hear that these things happen to everyone is what drives you forward. It makes you think, okay, maybe what I'm doing is not a waste of time because you're actually achieving what you wanted to achieve. So yeah, just broadening the audience as much as I can. Many people have said, but why would you do that? Because technically you are just going out there for fame, as they like to say. But it just goes beyond that. It goes beyond thinking like that, and just broadening the audience, like I said.
And saying what other people are too afraid to say and are too afraid to speak up on. I think that's very important. On that note of speaking up on, you recently started posting a lot of videos on your personal Instagram account. The other day you told me that you started using TikTok as well. And I want to talk about influencers. Recently, I think it was a while ago, we had an interview with one of your people within #BeforeMe, and the issue of Troy Shepherd came up. Now, for those of you that don't know, Troy Shepherd is a South African comedian, and he does content on TikTok and Instagram, etc. And he basically ridiculed the whole feminine movement and toxic masculinity, but it just wasn't it, it just didn't float my boat. And a lot of people, including me, commented on that video. I want you to, what is your feeling towards influencers using their platforms, especially people like Troy Shepherd with thousands and thousands of followers, acting responsibly when it comes to these issues?
To me, it's like they don't realize the amount of people that they reach at once. I also commented on that certain post, and I told him that as a person who has so much following, you do have a right to choice and your right to expression, but realize that what you're saying is tantamount to what people have been advocating for such a long time. And if you have 1.5 million followers like you do, posting that video, I promise you, when all 1.5 million followers of those people see that video, most of them will be convinced that he's right, because he's called an influencer for a reason. He influences people. So when let's say one person out of that 1.5 million followers go to their family and ridicules the feminine movement like Troy Shepherd did, obviously then it means that the family will start to think like that as well. So it doesn't only go to the 1.5 million followers that he has. And recently I've also started to use influencers, and I've started to collaborate with them in videos and so forth. And the message was clear from the onset. We are going to make content that can get people to interact, that can get people educated. And I'm not going to say something that is closed. I'm going to say open-ended statements that really get people thinking. The other day I talked about the effects of gender-based violence on the child, which at that point I think many people didn't understand, but hearing my story today, I think many of them will understand. It is those type of things that really get the conversation going. Encouraging dialogue has been the centerpiece of my initiative. Letting people speak about this so-called sensitive subjects, and if you don't want to talk about it, you are not going to be considered a leader anyway. So these influencers really need to understand their role in society. They have a huge role to play in whatever societal issue that we're trying to solve. So yeah, that's just my message to all the influencers out there. Realize that the drive and the amount of audience that you have and everything that you say will ultimately affect a person. You just have to control whether it does for the good or the bad.
And social media platforms aren't really regulated properly nowadays. Anyone can access those videos. You get an 8-9-year-old watching those videos and thinking that's how men are supposed to be, and that's how men are supposed to act towards women. So responsible use, I think that's very important. One of the positive ways that you use your platforms, and I saw that you did a poll the other day where you asked men to respond to. You basically asked the question, and you have to correct me if I'm wrong here, if you're a man and you have experienced gender-based violence, then you have to vote.
Yes,
Tell us about that. What did the results look like?
So constantly want to get people's reactions and learn about stuff and just go back to the WhatsApp group and talk about these things based on what I've learned, which is something that I started particularly Sesh. It's basically my opinion on something that has happened to me, and I'm basically translating it onto my Instagram page. But the result of that poll was 50-50. 40 people responded to that poll, and 20 people said yes, and 20 people said no. And for me, it was very interesting to see the diverse, the amount of diverse people that really are out there. Now, the problem with the people who say no is they won't necessarily see the need to do something about gender-based violence. And the problem with the people who say yes is that they will get complacent about gender-based violence. And I'll get to explaining this too. So firstly, the people who say no, sometimes you don't do something about gender-based violence because it doesn't never happen to you. Very simple. And the people who say yes, they have experienced it, they get complacent because technically it happens to you, so what? Then what? You know? You share a video, 1 or 2 videos, 3 videos, done. You think that you've made a difference out there. You get complacent about the work that you have to do. So that for me was what I was trying to deduce from the poll. And I really, really hope that people understand the reasonings behind me doing all these things. It's not for me to get you interested about gender-based violence, but really to learn as much as I can about it so that I can educate you as much as I can.
Fantastic. And I think another element that's quite interesting for me is those that didn't respond at all.
Yeah.
Yes. I know that obviously with you all know that with Instagram polls, you are able to see, you are the people that voted, so it might be an issue of being shy, but it's interesting to know that there are people that might have experienced it, but just don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
In the last couple of months or so, specifically, I think it was in the beginning of this year, end last year, we've experienced a lot of transphobic attacks in South Africa, and I know that this isn't something that you've necessarily talked about on your platforms, but what is your opinion on transphobia specifically in villages, in African villages, because this is where we've seen a lot of these incidents take place?
I think it goes back to what are we teaching people? The fundamental issue here is there is a lack of education about gender identity, about the words and the concept respect and dignity, which is sacramentally entrenched into our constitution. Yes, many of the different nations might not have it, but the international laws do encourage the right to respect and to be treated in a dignified manner. But going back to your question and relating it to the statement that I just said prior to responding to this question, we need to educate people who don't have access to information. All these people are homophobic and all of those things because they don't have access to really informative, educational information and content. They don't have social media. People in villages just do not have social media. They can't interact with anyone. They can't be taught. Like I know, for example, there are definitely TikTok videos that really do educate you. And I really love that about social media. You can choose your way of how you do social media. And if you can get those things available to people, I'm not saying give them TikTok, I'm saying encourage education in all facets of society. It really doesn't take a lot for someone to tell your fellow being that, you know what you just said is wrong, and here is why it's wrong. Show him the result of what is wrong. We are in university now. I go back to my village when I have recess or something like that, and I want to translate a message that I learn here and what I get taught here. So doing that, we all have people, even in those villages, who really do go out into towns. And it's really those people's responsibility who have access to this information, to take that information and transfer it onto those who don't necessarily have access to it because of the poverty and social indifferences that we might have.
Completely agree with you. And I think I know that you don't like it when we bring government in, but I think government definitely plays a role here. I'm doing my study on the social development role of the public broadcaster, which is the SABC, and I think they can really expand their programming and community radio stations, newspapers, and stuff like that, just to reach those community and then use these media platforms to educate our people on these matters. Atang, what is your message to the men out there?
I don't want to talk for a very long time because I think when you think about gender-based violence, you think about violence on women and children and people whose voices are turned down by society. My voice to you, young man, is you need to realize that you must try and effect change now. Because if you don't, your child might get exposed to gender-based violence. If you don't teach your friends, your family, and you don't break the patriarchal institution that is entrenched into our society, then you are basically letting your daughter and your child be exposed to gender-based violence. You don't want to hear your daughter coming to you and say, my husband hit me, my husband is economically abusing me, or doing something that I don't like. You need to realize that, and the sooner you realize it, the better. That's what I have to say to these young men.
Strong message. Lastly, I want to get to the name now. Out of everything that we have discussed, your story, where you find yourself now, how you've grown, hashtag you before me. Put it into context for us.
Okay, so my favorite book is called Me Before You by a famous writer called Jojo Moyes. Love her. And it goes on about this young man who took his life. He was a quadriplegic, couldn't do anything for himself. And there was a young woman looking after him, and they fell in love. And he decided to take his own life because he couldn't provide to this woman what another man could. So he selfishly, inverted commas, took his own life and left this woman to basically live without him. And I went on to say, I'm going to start something that will make people understand that I'm devoting my time to change. And I switched the words around to mean you before me, which means selflessness. I am putting you before my own needs. Obviously my needs are important, but then I'm willing to make your needs mine, and I'm putting you before me. So that's how the name came about, and I just decided to discern the initiative's name from the name you before me by adding a hashtag as well as an exclamation mark, because it needs to be emphasized. That's how I came to the name.
Emphasis on putting your fellow human being for yourself.
Yeah.
I think that's an amazing name, an amazing initiative, and I can only imagine the great things that you as an organization, that you as an individual are still going to do. Atang, thank you so much for offering me this opportunity to help you tell your story. For those of you that tuned in, this was the very first session of the Sesh. Many more to come. Thank you for your time, and until next time.